Flyers, winners of 8 straight. How have they done it? What has changed? Well, if you ask some people, nothing's changed much. They've been the second-best team in hockey the last 4 months, and Kevin Durso was there last night, Kevin_Durso on Twitter, and he joins us now with a look at what was, for a moment, the first-place Flyers. They're tied atop the Metro with the Capitals. Let's get some more insight on the orange and black from 97.3 ESPN.com Flyers insider Kevin Durso. 8 straight, Kevin. Obviously, we've been talking more and more, and people are paying more and more attention, but you're there all the time, all season long. And what are some of the key changes that you have noticed that has kind of propelled them from being a possible playoff team to a possible wild card team to now a possible division champion?
The key answer is consistency, and it's what they've brought, particularly at home, that makes a huge difference. And the thing that I see most of all, and I wrote about it after the win against Washington earlier this week, is that early in the year, Alain Vigneault talked a lot about how this was going to be a process, and he mentioned that a few times during the preseason and almost took a Sixers mindset, trust this process and we'll see the results soon enough. And he hasn't used that word in several weeks. It's no longer a process for them. They've adapted to this system. They live and die by it, and they just go for it with all the energy they have. That their energy is up constantly. Alain Vigneault is very good at rotating lines and keeping the players fresh throughout the game, so you get extra effort in the late third period stages when you need it the most, and it's presented that consistency aspect. So now when they go out, I've kind of found it ironic, especially on home ice. One of the things I was thinking just recently, especially after last night's game, they win last night 4-1, and they won against the Rangers last week 5-2, and they beat the Jets 4-2 and the Sharks 4-2. And the way that they've been winning games, it's kind of business as usual in that building. They just go out and they handle the task at hand, and the result is always seemingly not really a close one. I remember the past few years it's been winning in overtime a lot and getting the game to overtime and watching it fall short. There's none of that right now. It's just business as usual.
Obviously, one major difference that the common fan would see from this team to last year's team would be a full year of Carter Hart. But that's not necessarily the only thing. It's a similar roster, but what are some of the big differences from this year's roster to last year's roster, which are kind of similar? There's not a whole heck of a lot. They didn't go out and break the bank in free agency, but what are some of the biggest differences from this year to last year?
Yeah, they didn't go out and break the bank in free agency, but one of the big free agents they did get was Kevin Hayes, and having him as your second-line center does make a huge difference for this team. One of the things I just think is completely different about this team from last year to this year is the depth they have and the way that they're able to get it to produce. It's from one year to the next, and some of that is coaching. It's knowing where to put guys and knowing how to handle them in certain situations. When you can take a guy like Claude Giroux, and he's still a top-line guy for you offensively, and he's still a top power play guy, but you feel like you can limit his minutes on the penalty kill, which keeps him fresher later in a game and fresher for those situations where you feel like you need a goal. I think that a great example of that is the fourth goal the Flyers scored last night. It comes right after the third goal. It was 26 seconds later, but it's the next shift. It's the top line buzzing in the offensive zone. Giroux makes a nice keep at the blue line. That starts this three-man rush. Voracek gets the 2 chances around the net. Couturier is the one who gets the goal. And they just come at you in full force. They're a very opportunistic bunch, but they create those opportunities by playing a strong structure in the neutral zone and in the defensive zone. And that's really where the big difference is also. It's the dedication to playing defensively first, creating turnovers as opposed to giving the puck away and sitting back on your heels. They just stay with it throughout the course of the 60 minutes, and that's what has them playing up to the same level as anybody in this league.
All right, so of all the things, though, what do you think is driving this 8-game winning streak? Is it Carter Hart? Is it just depth, roster depth? What would you say is kind of driving this team and this surge that they've been on?
I would say the forward depth, especially since the trade deadline, because, I don't think anybody made a huge deal out of Derek Grant being acquired by the Flyers. It was a good depth pickup, but nobody made a huge deal out of it. He's played 5 games. In that first game, it was really unfair to judge him because he had made an overnight flight and had to play less than 24 hours later. But the 4 games since, he's got 5 points, and he's been contributing as much as anybody has. And you put him on a line with You put them on a line with whoever you can think of at this point. They've got Scott Lawton down there. They've got Nick Aube-Kubel playing with him at times. They've got Michael Raffel playing with him at times. Tyler Pitlick. These are bottom six guys that are contributing in huge ways in these last two games specifically. And it's amazing what a team can look like when you don't have to turn to your top guys every single night. And I asked Sean Couturier about this last night, and asked him actually in particular, when the team faces adversity like they did early in the third period, you give up that first goal to Carolina, and you start to think that the possibility is the momentum's going to shift because Carolina's a fresh team. You had to play Washington the night before, so your legs are going to start to go in this third period. And you come back and you answer with 2 goals in 26 seconds less than 3 minutes later. And he specifically pointed out to me, not only is it that they answer quickly, but it's look at who's doing the scoring. Yes, he gets one of those goals, but Aube-Kubel gets the first one, and that restored the 2-goal lead. And that's another bottom six member of this team contributing a huge way with a goal that matters so greatly to this team's success. So I think that that's been the key driving force to the 8-game winning streak, but everything else applies as well. Goaltending, getting defensemen who are able to score goals and maintain the solid structure. It's just about everything going the right way for the Flyers.
All right, Kevin Durso at Kevin_Durso. I guess, in many sports, the 3 other sports, baseball, most people played growing up and can really kind of say, I have some knowledge of the game. Football, you've played the game, you understand, what a coach does. Basketball, you've played the game, you understand the systems and what they run. Hockey, it's hard to quantify what a coach means and what they do because the game moves so fast that rarely, Kevin, do you get a time to stop and break down a play or a system or what the team is doing because of the coach. Obviously, the coaching change has meant something here, but did you think it was going to be this big, and is it this big of a difference?
I absolutely think it's this big of a difference, and mainly because the fact that my biggest question coming into the season was, now that the coaching change was made, now that the new GM's been in place for the better part of a year, this is all about the players at this point. You're going to find out, especially bringing back a lot of the same players, how much of this was the players not playing up to their abilities or just not being as good of a team as everybody wants to think they are, or if that really was a coaching problem a year ago and that guys weren't allowed to play their game and play to their strengths and maybe have the right system in place. What Alain Vigneault has done is nothing short of spectacular. He has come in, instilled this system from the very beginning, and yes, it was a process at the beginning. They didn't have the best October. They didn't have the worst October either. But really in November is when it started to kick into gear, and you started to see the signs that this team had the potential to be hanging around into the playoff race. But really in the last 2 months is where it's turned into something much greater than that, and it's turned into something that's bordering on special at this point. It's probably going to turn into something very special if it continues this way, because nobody had the Flyers finishing at the top of the division or even competing for it. And here they are tied for the division lead. By virtue of tiebreakers, they very momentarily had the division lead, and they're going to have a great shot to take the division lead on Saturday when Washington has to play Pittsburgh and the Flyers get a team that's out of the playoff picture in Buffalo. So nobody had them in this spot, and the way they played, the looseness of the locker room, the willingness to play for each other, it's so much greater. The locker room is complete and total 180 from a year ago. It's much different than it was, and I think a lot of that has to do with the way the coach is and the ability to all be on the same page, know the task at hand going in, and be able to know what's expected of them in a way that works for players from a coaching standpoint. He knows how to talk to these players in a way that they get. They know that he's going to ask for a lot from them, but he also has the full respect of these players, and that's the best way to go about doing it. It's why he's been such a great coach for other teams. It's why the other teams that he's coached in years past have been able to only get better as the year goes on. So I think it makes a world of difference for the team, and Alain Vigneault showing he's 100% the right guy to coach this team.
All right, they beat the Caps the other night. The back-to-back last night, they get off to a great start. They got Buffalo this weekend, and then Boston and Tampa. Do you need to see them beat Boston and Tampa, or have you already been convinced that this team can make, I don't want to say a deep playoff run or anything crazy, but that can have playoff success? Have you already convinced of that, or do they need to beat a Boston and a Tampa to kind of say, I need to see more?
Well, I certainly would love to see those two games, and I'm certain, I don't want to overlook the game they have tomorrow night against Buffalo, but a lot of minds are going to the Boston game as the big measuring stick, and rightfully so. That's the team that's at the top of the NHL standings. Yes, the Flyers have already beaten that team twice this year, but those were very different games, and the team was very different at the time. So I'd love to see what they look like against Boston, knowing the role they're on right now, and to see if that keeps up against the top team in the league. Same with Tampa. Tampa's been a team that's been on a roll. And granted, it's funny. I don't know that Tampa's going to be able to catch Boston in their own division for the role they've been on, but that's how competitive those two teams are and how deep those two teams are. It's going to be a great test to see how the Flyers match up in terms of the depth that they have now as compared to what Boston's had for several years. I don't know that I need to see wins in both. I would like to see a win in one to be fully convinced to keep that momentum going. I think it would be a very telling thing if the Flyers get the win against Tampa on the road. To play a team like that, the way you had to play Washington on the road and get a good win, that would tell me a lot. If they can beat Boston in the meantime as well, that's a great telling sign as well. Obviously, this winning streak won't last forever, but what you want to see is them, whenever it does end, you want to see them keep the foot on the gas and be able to go right back to what they've been doing consistently. They haven't lost back-to-back games since early January, and that's really why they're in this position, because they don't look too far ahead and they don't look too far behind. They erase the memory of a loss. They don't sit there and celebrate a win for too long either. It's been a great quality of this team. And I asked James Van Riemsdyk like that before the Washington game. It was before the second Ranger game, actually, at practice last Saturday. And I asked Alain Vigneault that as well, because you would think that going into that game against the Rangers this past Sunday, everybody knew what was at stake with that game against the Rangers. If they won that game and Washington lost, you had a battle for first place on your hands on Wednesday, and that wasn't the case. But you didn't want to go and just jump that game and go to Washington. You wanted to stick to that game, too, because it was just as important. And they haven't done that with any game in recent memory. They stick to the one that's right in front of them. So I think the focus right now is on Buffalo. Play another good game, have a shot to take the division lead as a result, and then go to these two games next week that are going to be huge to see where you rank against the top two teams in the Eastern Conference.
Kevin Durso covers the Flyers at Kevin_Durso. Check out all his Flyers coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. There's so much more to kind of get into with this team because it has been. Let me ask you, you're at all the home games, and there's been a lot of talk about the building hasn't been as full. It seems a little like, the fans were kind of staying away. Has that been changing? Are you noticing that changing? Have we lost you, Kevin? Are you there?
I'm there.
Oh, sorry.
I'm here, guys.
Yeah. So have you noticed a change in the building? Is it full? Is it back? I mean, there was a lot of talk about the building early in the year, even midway through the year, that the team was kind of winning, and yet the fans were coming back. Was that different last night?
Definitely last night. And when I talked to you last week before the Ranger game, that was my hope, was that with everything that's been at stake lately, you want to start to see the building get to where it is come playoff time and treat these next few games as early playoff games. And I thought the building delivered last Friday. I certainly fans in attendance, and they were certainly involved early on when the Rangers got an early goal. But the building just kept being lively throughout that game. And I thought last night was another great example of it. It was a good crowd. And, even for a game that's coming up tomorrow against a team that's out of the playoff picture like Buffalo is, I'd want to see the same thing. Treat every game, know what's at stake here, too. The Flyers are probably going to come into that game knowing whether or not, they have a shot to somehow surpass Washington, whether Washington gets that game against Pittsburgh to overtime or loses in regulation. If that opportunity's there, the building should be fired up at the possibility of that, especially since the Flyers are playing a team that's out of the playoff picture. There's not many of those left on their schedule. So the possibility is there, and knowing what the team has done over the last 8 games, everybody should be fired up to come into that building with the knowledge that Washington plays in the afternoon. The result's going to be known. You're going to know whether or not the division lead is at stake, and hope that, like in the last 2 games, it delivers.
Talking with Kevin Durso on the Flyers, and, of course, the Flyers tomorrow, Buffalo, Tuesday, Boston, Thursday, Tampa, Saturday, the Wild, Edmonton. Then we kept asking, after Wednesday night playing at Washington, they had to kill off. It seemingly was like 10 penalties in that game. to get right back on it last night and get out to that lead. And I thought, quite frankly, Kevin, like Raffle looks like he gets shot out of a cannon. I mean, it just seems that this team has just has something special going right now. And that's what really is intriguing, is that you play them on the back-to-back, does it matter? You play them home and home, has it mattered? So my question really is, are you convinced that the consistency of this team will remain? Or are they just in a hot streak right now? Because even under Dave Haxtell, we saw them win 10 games in a row. So I guess, do they have the consistency that can remain the rest of the way here, or are they just going through a hot streak?
I'm going to go back to your question about what's different from last year's compared to this year, and that's a big difference. I think this is not some hot streak that's going to fade away. I think we've seen it. Realistically, they've on a streak like this for 2 months, not necessarily winning games in a row, but not losing games back-to-back. So when you're able to limit the losses, you're still riding a really good hot streak. So now they've just strung them together in a significant winning streak. 8 games is their longest of the year. It's the longest one they had last year as well, but the longest one they had last year came at a time when every point mattered. At this stage of the game, getting into the playoffs is really not a question anymore. They're just about locked in, not necessarily mathematically, but there's the other teams that are fighting for those playoff spots at the bottom, the wild cards. They're in the spot that the Flyers were in all those other years before, where every game matters, and there's just too much that goes into that push that everything can't go perfectly for those teams. So you know that when you're in a spot like the Flyers are, where at least in the top 2 at this point, you're pretty well locked in, and your focus is on whether or not you can be that top team in the division and make that challenge. What I've liked about, and I'm glad you mentioned Michael Raffle too, because one of the players who I think has been such a difference maker to this team over the last few games. But I'm, especially in the press box, I'm kind of an in-game commenter. As I see stuff unfold in front of me, I'll kind of point some things out. And as I saw that play unfold in front of my eyes, Tyler Pitlick's carrying the puck up the right wing, and I see Raffle kind of get free. And my comment was, he's got help, meaning Pitlick, and he gets that centering pass to him, and there's Raffle going in all alone, and he takes a great shot on Carolina's third-string goalie, no less. So they take advantage of all those opportunities really well. This is a team that we've questioned in years past if they have the finishing ability, and they've been able to take advantage of such opportunities. It's a quality of Alain Vigneault's system I remember from years past when he was coaching the Rangers. I used to think it was one of the most frustrating things about the Flyers playing the Rangers is that every time they had an opportunity in transition, they'd find a way to beat you. And the Flyers are turning into that team where every time they have an opportunity in transition, they're making the most of it. And it's one of the great qualities about this team. And, yeah, I do see this turning into something that's been consistent because realistically it's been consistent for 2 months.
Yeah, and it's something you said, about consistency. They're consistent everywhere. They're one of the best at killing penalties. They're one of the best at scoring on the penalty. Heck, they scored a shorthanded goal the other night. One night after they beat the Caps, they had a kill. I just mentioned the power plays in a physical game. They come back last night. They play a clean game. It almost seems like any way you want to play them, they'll play into that style, and they're learning how to win in multiple ways. In the past, you'd see a team that can only win one way, and you talked about it. When you only have one line, you can only really win one way. But they can beat you in a bunch of different styles, it seems like.
Yeah, they really can. And, you get involved in a game like the Sunday Rangers game and score 2 power play goals and early on. You get a shorthanded goal in that first period. You need to be able to score on all sides like that, and you need to be able to win the special teams battles when you can. You need to have good penalty killing. You need to get the goaltending as well. And one of the things, it's funny we haven't really talked too much about Carter Hart in this particular conversation, but as he gets toward the end of that game yesterday, you knew the third period was going to be a little bit tougher for him just because he was going to see a more volume of shots than he probably was going to early. I was a little surprised Carolina came out as passive as they did, and some of that was credit to the Flyers for playing that style. Rod Brind'Amour, the coach of the Carolina Hurricanes after the game last night, even said, that's how we win games, and they kept us to the outside, so good, credit to them. They did what we would want to do and won a game that way. And the Flyers did that really well for 2 periods, got the 3-goal lead in the third period. And then at that point, the volume of shots that came his way wasn't going to be a big deal. And even then, he made a couple of really impressive saves in the final 10 minutes that are difference makers. You still got to make those saves, and he's as calm as anybody back there in that situation, and he's part of that consistency. It's amazing to see it all fall into place like this, and that's what makes it so special is that everything has fallen in place. And even if one area dropped off in a game, the Ranger game on Sunday, they gave up 3 power play goals. The penalty kill wasn't what it normally is. But it's okay. They weather the storm, they move on from it, and they come back with something stronger. It's one of the most redeeming qualities of this team is that when something doesn't really go their way, whether it's the Rangers getting 2 power play goals in the third period to make it a game again from 5-1 to 5-3, or Washington scoring the first goal of a very critical game between the two teams at the top of the Metro, or a team like Carolina, who you knew was going to be fresher in the third period, getting the first goal of a third period to cut the lead to 1. It doesn't factor them at all. It doesn't faze them at all. They come right back. They do something on the positive side and take control right back in the game.
And even down to Kevin, it seems like a lot of people were scratching their heads of, I'd like to see Carter Hart play against the Caps. I mean, he's got to play some road games here against good competition. Why are you playing Brian Elliott? And as much as I think a lot of people will still want to see Hart play those road games against the better teams, Elliott goes out and wins, and then you have Hart back at home the next night. I guess that is a question, though. Carter Hart winning games on the road against some of these teams, I don't know if that's like a concern come playoff time, but he's going to play in the playoffs every night. They're not going to be playing Elliott on the road and him at home. So at some point, he's going to have to play some of these tough road games.
Yeah, for sure. And that was why I was a little surprised he didn't get the Washington game, because I thought that was a good spot to give him a test to see if you can – what you want to be able to show, especially you want him to show you, is that you can strap this team's hope to his back and have him carry you through a game when you need it the most, especially on the road, especially against playoff teams. Granted, it's really not really right to question anything Alain Vigneault is doing right now. He's pushed all the right buttons so far. So who are any of us to question what he's doing? But I thought they might have gone that way, and I do see them going that way in the near future. I think that Carter Hart is poised to get these 2 starts against Boston and Tampa. The Tampa road game is certainly going to be one. I want to see what he's got for that game. And as they move down the stretch, they don't really have a lot of road games left against true playoff teams. Nashville is clinging to the borderline of the playoffs, so it's tough to say in another week's time whether or not, or 2 weeks' time, whether they'll be in the playoff picture or not. They play road games against Detroit and New Jersey, and they're not really going to be playoff tests. They got a road game against Buffalo at the end of the year. That's not going to be a playoff test. So there's not many left. So that Tampa game is one that I would definitely expect him to get so they can see that from him. But Brian Elliott's going to get his share of starts with the back-to-backs as well. He'll definitely play one next weekend. I'm a little curious to see where they decide to go next with tomorrow's game, with the next game, just because, they obviously today was a complete off day for them with the previous back-to-back, so we don't know who's getting the start and goal and won't know until tomorrow morning. But it could be Brian Elliott tomorrow, just because you could give Carter Hart a little extra time of resting up before this stretch run, because he's going to get Boston, he's going to probably get Tampa Bay, and he's probably going to get Edmonton next week, and those 3 are high-powered offenses with a lot of depth and with a lot of speed and a lot of talent, and you're going to need your top-notch goaltender to be able to get it done. So I wouldn't be surprised if Elliott gets to start. But given Carter Hart's home successes, he's 19-2-2 at home this year, which is just astronomical. So he very well could be in goal for that game as well, and it wouldn't be a surprise.
All right, Kevin Durso, we got Flyers and Sabres tomorrow. Again, Boston next week, Tampa. And obviously, there's some big ones. I mean, people feel like this is an 8-game win streak. They're at the top, but it's not like it is a lock that they're going to be in one of these top 3 spots in the Metro. They still got to fight their way. They got a tough schedule coming up here. So that's another thing that you got to keep in mind is just because they've been playing so well over this stretch here, look, they're at 87. I would imagine that they're going to be pretty locked into one of the top 3 Metro spots, right? They're, 8 points up on Columbus right now?
Yeah, they're 8 up, and the key to that is that they've continued to, not only in the home series that they had with them recently, but in the game since, they've continued to pull away from them. And you're leaving teams like Columbus, you're leaving the Islanders behind, you're leaving, Carolina's not even in the playoff picture anymore, and you're leaving the Rangers, who are making a push and might sneak in as one of those playoff teams, because they're definitely not out of the playoff race, but you're leaving those teams in the dust at this point and making it a 3-team race at the top. Pittsburgh's still kind of lingering there. They're 3 points behind the Flyers and Capitals, but they have 1 game in hand. So Pittsburgh's going to somehow have a shot to make 2 points up and could be 1 behind them. So it's a 3-team race. I definitely think the Flyers are one of the top 3 teams in this division at this point, but I do think that it's also not lost on them that home ice is going to be so important to whatever playoff series they get. They definitely like to have it for a potential Flyers-Penguins or Flyers-Capital series, whichever one turns out to be the first round between maybe 2 and 3. But they definitely would love to be that team at the top of the division that not only would be able to play at home in the first round, but would get home ice in the second round for sure as well. That could make a huge difference that could be the difference between maybe winning one playoff series and making a deeper run that gets to the conference finals. It's having that home ice and the way they go and play, and as I said earlier, getting things done kind of business as usual. It's not even like the games on home ice are close. Ivan Provorov said it after last night's game. They're not just winning games this time around on a winning streak. They're dominating teams. And the only really close game they've been involved in, aside from how close the Washington game was for a good amount of it up until the middle of the third period, was the second Columbus game on the road. That was the only other one in really recent memory that was close at the end and you were fighting it off to the very end. And that's just a show of what they've been able to do, the confidence that they have as a locker room, the looseness that they're playing with, and the unity that this team has to try to complete this task, because it's no longer about getting into the picture. Now they want to put their stamp on it and make a bigger statement than that, and a really big statement would be not only getting to the top of the division, but holding it.
All right, Kevin Durso with us, of course, and he'll be with us a lot throughout this run in the playoffs, hopefully a big, long playoff run. It's great to have potential Flyers playoff hockey back, but it seems pretty safe now that you could say they're at least going to be a playoff team, as we just mentioned. 8 points ahead of Columbus, 9 points up on the Islanders for the second spot. But now, right now their matchup with Pittsburgh in round one, they can get that top spot. That really changes the dynamic, because now you get out of playing one of the top two or a 2 or 3. You would go against one of those wild card teams, and that could really set you up for something special. So we'll talk more to Kevin next week as they have Boston and Tampa on the schedule. All right, pal. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Kevin Durso, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.